Hello and welcome to Code Harvest. This is part 2 of the Tastalicious shopping cart web series where we demonstrate step by step with our explanations as to how you can create a floating cart shopping cart for a restaurant. Check out the playlist link down below to access the full series. Now give this video a like, subscribe to Code Harvest, and now let's get started. Now we're going to be working on the elements that is inside the cart box. And so inside the cart box we want to select this class called heading. That is the next element that we're going to be working on. And in fact, I don't think this, we don't need to add two different divs because there's no difference in positioning. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm just going to paste it as one element because I believe the other element was a little extra. So now we're going to be working on the positioning of the first part, which is going to be the title and the purple circle as one, and then the SVG, the button that is responsible for closing the shopping cart when the user clicks on it. So what we want to achieve is a flexible layout so that we can basically ensure that the flex direction is in a row, they're both in the same line. Another thing is horizontally, and another thing is we want to ensure that it takes up the full width available. So because we want to include spacing between the all of this whole section, the title and the circle and the SVG, which should be towards the right. So we're going to use justified content, and then we're going to use space between in order to achieve that. And then we want to ensure that the button, because it's going to be smaller in height than the title, we want to ensure that it is not fixated at or positioned at the top. By default it would probably be at the top. We want it to be in the center, so we want it to be vertically centered. So we're going to use this property called place items. Alright, so now we're going to be working on the text. So when we check our text, we can see that it has two elements, H1 and one called P. We will just select the main container, which is heading, and the heading class that is particularly from Cartbox. And so we want to first work on the first heading, which says my order. And so we just want to set the font size to 25 pixels and the font weight to 600. So just a little bit thinner than what it is. So that looks a little bit lighter. And then the next thing is the paragraph element, and we just want to change the color to be a little bit lighter than the rest. We want it to be a little like a lighter gray basically, and so I found a good combination of 11186. Next thing is we want to specify the font size, and we want it to be a little bit smaller. Next thing is we want to ensure that it is thinner, so we're going to set it at a font weight of 400, and we want to ensure the text is aligned towards the left side. And now we're going to be working on the SVG. So right now we can't see it since because we haven't set the width and height yet basically. So now we are going to call the same container, however this time we want the close button class, and we want the SVG that is in the close button class. So what we want to do is set the width to 25 pixels both in width and height, and then we want to set the color of the SVG, and we have to use the fill property for that, and we want to fill it with a pinkish purplish color, so we don't want any gradient. So we're going to go with 128.0.2025. And so now we can also remove the fill property that is here in the SVG by default. And one more thing in the heading is we want to remove the transparent background. So now we're going to work with the close button class, and so we want to ensure that the background is transparent and that there is no border. Alright, so now our heading looks pretty good, so we can move on to the cart items container now, the middle section. However, I feel like the arrow is a little too thin, so I would prefer if we added another property called stroke, so it will just add another layer. And I just want to make the arrow a little thicker. I feel like it would be better if we made the arrow a little bit thicker. Alright, so now we're going to be working with the next element, which is the cart items container. And so the only thing that we are going to be adding is a property called position relative. And the reason why we're adding this is because very soon we're going to be adding this white overflow property element. So it basically tells or lets the user know visually that if there's more items in their cart, so that they can scroll down and check the other things that are in their cart. So it will basically be just like a white linear gradient appearing from, for example, if it's at the top, from top to bottom, where top is white, and as it progresses and it goes down, it becomes more transparent, and then same with the bottom, but vice versa. So we're going to be using position absolute because the fade will be in front of the image. It will not be just on top of the image, it will be in front of the image. So the white fade overflow will just be like a sneak peek, like, oh, there's more stuff in here. So now before we move on, we're also going to ensure that everything that is in the cart items container is basically positioned towards the center. So we're going to use text align center. So that should move this element towards the center. Alright, so now the next thing that we're going to work on is the empty cart message and element. So we're going to select with a dot since it is a class, and what we want to do is just specify the font size, which should be about 15 pixels, the thickness of the text of each letter, which should be about 500. And then later on, as we progress, when we are working with JavaScript, we're going to add a little function where, if there's items, JavaScript checks if there are items, and if there are 0 items, then this message should appear. But if there are items, it should disappear. It should be set to display none. So right now, we'll just leave it as is. So right now, we're going to set it at display block, so that this is what the user sees first, where there aren't any items in their cart, and it assumes that the user doesn't have any items in their cart. Now another thing is the unordered list, which is where our list items will be contained. So here we just want to specify the height. So basically we're setting it at 50% of the viewport height. So we're not really setting it to a fixed value where if the user is viewing the shopping cart in a different screen, we have to change it to this amount of pixels or that amount of pixels, and we have to make multiple media queries in CSS for that, and that can be tedious. So just setting it to viewport height will basically CSS will automatically calculate the appropriate height of the cart list for us. We are also going to add another feature, which is overflow Y, and this ensures that, and we're going to set it to scroll. So basically this allows the user to scroll down to access or to view items that are surpassing the height of the list, as the user may order many items that could be more than the size that we set it to. Alright, so now another property that we're going to be, another selection we're going to be including for the unordered list is for the scroll bar, because right now, as you can see, the scroll bar is just there. We don't need it to be seen because we're going to add the white fade overflow to show the user that visually that they probably need to scroll down. So we don't need the scroll bar to be visible, and it does not look right, it doesn't fit. So we're going to remove it, we're going to get rid of it, and in order to get rid of it, we're going to create another selection, and then we're going to add a pseudo class called WebKit_ScrollBar. And so we just want to get rid of the scroll bar immediately, so we're going to use display none, and so now our shopping cart looks much cleaner. Alright, so now before we continue with the total checkout, we just want to assume as if an item was already added to the shopping cart. So we just want to now quickly design the basically how an item would look like if it was stored in the shopping cart. And so it will be stored inside unordered list. So we're going to create a list item. So we're going to include this we're going to load this through JavaScript. For now, we're just going to set the layout and basically how the list item will look like, and then we will include this in our JavaScript code. So first of all, we want to create a div, and we are basically going to assign this div to a class called cart item. Now cart item will be divided into 2 parts. The first section will basically contain the image, the title of the food that they ordered, and the quantity as well. And then the second section, or the second child, will be the price. So now we're going to create 2 main divs, which will also contain its own divs. So now the first div, we will create a class and we will call it item1. So now this will also contain 2 different main child elements. So the first part will contain the image. So we're going to create a class and we're going to call this cart item image. Now inside this container there will be more elements. So the first one will be the image element, and this image element we will just create one for demonstration purposes, but we will include JavaScript code that will add this automatically. So for now, when we check our file, when we check our images, and when we check our menu list, we can see multiple we can choose from multiple choices. So we're going to go with ice cream, and we can go with the second one. So basically the file path for that image, for image 2, is inside the images folder, and then it is in menu list. And then the next thing we want to do is add the alternative name, so in case the image has not been able to load. So just in case the browser has not loaded the image on time and the user sees all of the other elements, the image hasn't loaded yet, it's taking long, or something went wrong, then the user can use the alternative, can view a text basically as an alternative. So we're going to call this based on the description of the image, and we just saw a white vanilla strawberry mixed ice cream, so we could just call it strawberry vanilla mix ice cream, or just strawberry vanilla ice cream. And then the second element in the cart item image container will include the button. Now this button will basically be hidden initially, however it will contain a trash bin. However, when the user hovers on that image, the user should be able to view a picture of a trash bin, and that will allow the user to delete the whatever cart item that is from the shopping cart. So we're going to add in an SVG and we're going to design it in CSS, and we're going to create this function with JavaScript later on. So first, let's just include the class, and the class is called remove button, and then the SVG for it, we can search for it in SVG repo, as they give us free SVGs for free. Alright, so we can now copy this SVG. However, we're going to just set the trash bin to white since it is filled, and then the background of the image will be dark. So it will be a dark, transparent background overlaying the image or in front of the image with this SVG in front as well. So that the user has the option to delete. Alright, so now we're going to create another div, and this div will basically contain the description as well as the amount of that product taken, and we're assuming that it has a quantity of 1. I mean, they selected one product. So now we're going to create a class, and we're going to call this cart item desk, standing for description, and now we're going to create a span element, and this span element will just contain the product's name. So for example, this one is called strawberry vanilla ice cream, and then we can create another span element which will just contain the quantity, and we can say quantity, the amount that was taken was just 1. Now the last element that we're going to be including is what comes after item 1, which is item 2, which will be positioned towards the right side. So towards the right side, that's where the price will be labeled. So now we're going to create a span element, and we're just gonna assume that maybe the ice cream is $7.99, and we're going to create a class for this, and we're just going to call this cart item price. Alright, so now as you can see, the image is a little too large, and the text elements are not visible, and they're all at the bottom of the ice cream. Also, we can see that our scrolling effect feature also works. So now we're going to head over to CSS, and we're going to start working on the cart item. So because it is a class, we'll select it with a dot. And also because the cart item class is specifically in the cart items container, we're going to select it through its container. And basically we want all of the elements to be in a row rather than in a column. So we're going to set a flexible layout. In order to achieve this, we're going to set the flex direction to be in a row. We want to ensure all the items are vertically centered, and then the image and as well as the description, which is one element, and then the price, which is the second element, which should be towards the right, image and description towards the left. There should be space between each of them, so we're going to use justify content space between. Then we also want to set the width, and we want to set it at 100% of the cart items container. Then now we also want to make sure that each cart item has spacing between each other. So we're going to create a margin bottom spacing of 10 pixels, but we are going to increase that up to 18 pixels. So now working on the first item, which contains the image as well as the description, we're going to select this and we're going to paste that here. So the element that is inside cart item, the first one is item 1, which contains the image as well as the description, and basically we want to ensure that they're both in a row, and we also want to ensure that they're vertically centered as well. Next thing is we want to work on the image, so we're going to create a class, and then for the cart item image, we want to set the width property, so it will be 70 pixels in width, 70 pixels in height. We want to ensure that the image is centered inside the background because we're going to include like basically a square that has a border radius, and the background will be slightly bigger than the image, and so we want to ensure that the image is centered both vertically and horizontally inside that specific elements, that specific square or background. So we're going to use display flex in order to achieve this, and then to make it centered horizontally, we're going to use justify content center, place items center. Then we're going to specify the background color of that square, and we want it to be like purplish, but we want it to also be a little bit slightly transparent, so it shouldn't be solid purple, but it should be slightly lighter. So we're going to specify this color, which I found was pretty cool, 236, which matches our website's theme, 192 and 255, and then the amount of transparency that it should have, where 0 is fully transparent and 1 is not transparent at all. We're going to set it at 0.442. Now we want to ensure that just in case the image overflows the container, just like right now, the image overflows the container. We want to hide the overflow, the content or the part of the image that overflows the square. So now you can see the square basically encapsulates the image. And then another thing is we want to include this property called position relative, and that is because we're going to use position absolute later on in order to include that remove button, that trash bin SVG. And we basically we don't want that trash bin to be on the top or on the bottom of the image. We want it to be just like right in front of the image, and in order to do that we have to take it out of the document flow. So we're going to use position absolute in order to achieve that, and we want to use, and so we're setting position relative here to ensure that the trash bin's starting position is not like at the beginning of the page, like what would be somewhere here, but we want it to be set to the we want it to be based on the element that we chose position relative to be, which is the cart item image container, which is the square. So we want to make sure that the starting position of the trash bin starts here and not from the beginning of the page. And then one more thing is we want to set the corners of the square, and we want to basically create a border radius. So we're going to set this to 10 pixels. And now I believe we can work on the next element, which is the remove button. Alright, so now we're going to be working on the remove button, which will be part of the image container. So we're going to copy this selection. We're going to paste it here because the remove button is inside this image container. So now we're going to select the button that we want to modify, and so for this we first want to set the width, which should be 100% of the image container, which is 70 pixels. So the button will take up the full width of the image container, and then we also want it to be the same for the height. Then we want to ensure that the background color at first, when the user is not hovering on the image, it should be transparent. So I'll set this with RGBA. And so we want to set it at 0 so that when the user does hover on the image, there's a smooth transition from fully transparent from 0 to, let's say, 0.5, where it is slightly transparent. So there's a black transparent background basically. And then we also want to ensure, since buttons usually have a border by default, we want to remove that border completely. And then also we want to ensure that the button is in front of the image. So we are going to have to use position absolute, and that is the reason why we have included position relative, so that we can make sure that the button is the button's size based on where the top value, left value, bottom value values are, is based on the image container and not of the whole page where it starts from here, but it starts from here instead. So now we can see the image, and then we want to ensure that it is always in front of the image. So we're going to just set it to a high value of 100. So we're ensuring that it is in front of the image at all times. Now we're going to work on the hovering property. So when the user does hover on this image container, then we want the button to have specific properties. So we'll use the same selection again, however we'll just add the hover pseudo class. And so now when the user is hovering on the button, then we want the background color to change, because the background color of the button is transparent right now. So we want it, when the user is hovering on it, we want it to be at the transparency to be at 0.5. So now you can see that the background color changes. However, we also need to add a transition property. So over here, we will add a transition property for the background color. This, we can slow down the transition by 0.4 seconds, and both ways, when the user is hovering on the object, on the image, and exits. So now we can see a much smoother, softer transition. So now we're going to work on the SVG, and because the SVG is part of the button, we'll create this same selection, and now we're just going to select the SVG. So we want the SVG to be slightly smaller than the background image, so we're going to set the width to 70 pixels, height 70 pixels, and basically we don't want the SVG to be seen when the user is not hovering on the image container, so we will set the opacity to 0 so that the SVG is completely transparent. So then when the user is hovering on the image container, only then the opacity should turn from 0 to 1. 1 is like 100% basically. And we want to add the transition property to ensure that it gives a smooth transition. So we will specify the property we want the transition to occur, and then we want it for 0.4 seconds, and in both ways when the user hovers and exits the image container. And then we're going to use this same selection once again for the hovering property. So when the image container is being hovered on, then we want the SVG to have one different property, one different value for the opacity, and we want it to turn to 1. So now when we try, we can see that there's a smooth transition. Oh, sorry, I meant to change this to 40 pixels. So now that should look much better. Now let's work on the image, as the image right now is completely large. It is going overboard. So we are going to now work on the image, which is in the image container. So we want the width to be 80% of the image container, which once again it is set at 70 pixels, both in width as well as in height. So now our image looks much better. However, now it looks expanded, and that doesn't look good. So we're going to use this property called object fit to ensure that the image fits the container properly and it is at a correct size. So we're going to use this value called contain. So now our image is looking pretty good. Now when we check our HTML page, we can see that the description is the second element of item 1. So it is part of the cart item class. So we're going to select the cart box, then we're going to select the element the element that it is in, and then we want to select the description text itself. The element that we want to modify. So first of all, the description includes the title name as well as the quantity. So we want them to have a flex direction of a column, so we're going to use a flexible layout to achieve this. So we're just going to change the flex direction to a column since it's in row by default. We want to ensure that the text is aligned to the left side, and then we also want to change the font weight to be a little more thicker than it is now. We want to change the font size to be about 15 pixels, and we want there to be some spacing between the image and the text. So we are going to include a margin left, so we're going to add spacing towards the left side of 30 pixels. And also I feel like the text would be too long, so we are going to change the length. So we're just going to call it strawberry ice cream. So we're just going to add a maximum length so that in our shopping cart the title can fit perfectly as well. So now we are going to work on the individual elements of cart item desk, and so we have two elements, the span element with the title and the span element with the quantity. So I believe the title should stay as it is, but the second span element should change. So we can select this with a pseudo class. So we are going to select the container and then the span element. So we want to only change the properties of the second span element. So in order to select the span element, to apply whatever we want to apply with only the span element of the second span element and not for both of them, we're going to use this class called nth child, and then we can specify which span element which element should be selected, whether it be the first, second, third, fourth, whatever, and that's why it's called nth child. So either it's the first child, second child, third child, fourth, etc. So we want to select, because there are two span elements inside this container, so we can only choose either one or two. So we want to modify the second one. And so what we're going to specify is the color. We want it to be lighter, just like here in the My Order section, the second element should be lighter. So we are going to select a light color of 170, and then the font size should be slightly smaller as well. So now our item is starting to look more like our shopping cart. So we are going to head over to CSS to find out where it is. So it is the second element of cart item. So once again, we will just select the main element cart box, the parent element of the element we want to select, which is cart item, and then the name of the element that we want to select, which is cart item price. And so what we want to do is just change the font weight, as right now it's too thin, the font size to 15 pixels, and the color, actually the color is already set to RGB 50 by default, which we already set in the code above. Now right now I feel like this is interrupting the look and the layout, so we're just gonna head over to the empty cart message class, and we're going to set this to none just for now. So now we are going to go back to cart item price, and so now we're going to work on the total checkout, but we can see that the next element which we need to work on is the white fade overflow before we head on to the cart checkout. Alright, so now we're going to work on the white fade overflow since we haven't worked on that yet. And there's two types. We've included it in two areas, one with the top class and one with the bottom class. So let's first specify what the white fade overflow class has. Now first of all, as we said before, the white fade overflow will be in front of the image. So we are going to use this property called position absolute in order to take it out of the document flow. And then we are going to ensure that it is 100% it takes up the full width of the container, which is from here to here. Then we are going to specify the height, and the height of it should be 15 viewport height. And then we're not going to specify the background color here because for the one with the top class, we're going to use linear gradient, and they're going to have slightly different properties, so we're not going to specify it here, but in the top and bottom classes. its individual classes. So for now we are just going to set the general property, which we want the element to be to have a left value of 0, so it should start from the left. And then we are going to set the z index to ensure that it is always in front of the cart item. And because we set the z index to 100 for the trash bin SVG, we'll just set it to 101. And then now we're going to set the individual top and bottom properties. So for top, we're going to first set the opacity. So initially it will not be seen until the user scrolls down. So we'll set the opacity to 0 to be completely transparent. And then for the where it's going to be positioned is obviously at the top of the container. And the cart items container starts from here and ends from here, since we set it to 50 viewport height. So that should be from here to here. Now we want to set the top value to 0. And then the background color, the background will have a linear gradient, so we'll use the background property, and then we are going to use this linear gradient value. So it's going to start from the top until the bottom, so we're going to use to bottom. That's the first property. And then we want it to be from white to a lighter version of white to completely transparent. So we don't want it to go from white to transparent straight off, but we want it to be white, then half white, half transparent, half white to transparent. So we're going to use this RGB value of 22225, which is white, and for the transparency value it should be half transparent, half white. And then the last value is going to have a complete transparency. So this ensures a smoother fade or a smoother transition. And then we kind of just want the same properties but different values. So for bottom, this value, the opacity value, should be seen when the user first opens a shopping cart, that is if their cart item is full. And then for the top value, it will not have a top value but a bottom value, so it should be at the bottom of the cart items container, which is around here. And then for the background value, we are going to set it to top instead, so everything should be the same. Alright, so in order to see how the weight overflow would look like, we can change the opacity value for the top, since there's an item here already, so we should expect to see it on top and in front. And I believe we don't see yet, because if we check our HTML page, we can see that the classes are together basically. So it's like top is not a child element, it is a second element after the wide fade overflow class. So we'll put these two classes together, so now you can see this smooth fade overflow. And now we are going to work on the last element of the shopping cart, and that is cart checkout. So we're going to select this element. This is part of the cart box, so we'll select its container. And so now for this checkout element, we want to ensure that the font weight is about 600. It's thick because right now it looks very thin. And then what we want to do is, it feels like the text is a little too thick, but then if we set it to, for example, 500, it feels too thin, so we are going to set it back to 600. And so what we can do, so we want something that is between 500 and 600, but we can't get that, we can't set it to 550. So what we can do is we can add this property called WebKit font smoothing, which helps in smoothing the font or smoothing the letters, so that the lining of the letters are much more smoother and softer basically. So what we are going to do, it's like it removes the rough edges or something, it gives a softer look. So in order to achieve that, we are going to have to set the value to anti-aliased. So now that looks much thinner than and softer than the boldness of 600. So you can see without it looks too heavy, but then with the anti-alias property it looks softer. And then the next thing we want to add is the font size, and we'll set it to 17 pixels. Alright, so now we want to achieve a flexible layout so that we can, because there are two main elements, which is of this element, which is the total, the price, and second element is the button. So what we want to do is create a flexible layout with display flex. And then basically we want to set the flex direction to ensure that it is in a column, since the button will be at the bottom. Then we are just going to push these two elements towards the right side, so we're going to use text align, and we're going to set it towards the right side. Alright, so now we're going to work on the total checkout. So the total checkout is the element that holds the text total, and the price, which is the span element. So we are going to select this, however we're just going to change the name to total checkout. And so we're just going to add one property, which is margin bottom. We want to set it to 27 pixels. So now there's spacing between the text and the button, and then now we are going to work on the individual elements. So the first one is the one that carries the text total, and what we want to do is just set the margin right spacing of 20 pixels. And another thing that we have to include is we want to include a flexible layout where there is a flex direction. So we're going to change the flex direction to be in a row instead, and then we want to ensure that the items are placed towards the right side horizontally, so we're going to use justify content and we're going to set it at the end. I believe that's all, so we are going to continue. So now the paragraph text should, the styling of the text should stay as is, as we've already set it here. However, the next element should have different styling properties. So the color of the text should be different, and it should be a little more purple, fitting the theme of the company. So we're going to set it to a shade of 1280255. So that should make it a little more purple. And then the last thing we'll work on is the button. So the button is the checkout button. It already has the color which we have set with this class, which we've added in CSS previously or earlier with purple pink button. So now we just need to set the button properties. So what we want to do is we will select the card box, we'll select the checkout button, the name of the element, and then we first want to remove the border because so we want to set that to 0. And then another thing is we want to change the font size, and we'll change it to 15 pixels. We want to set the font weight, and we'll set it to 600. And then the next thing we want to do is add the padding spacing. So height wise, top and bottom properties should each have 10 pixels, but left and right properties should each have 20 pixels. And then we're going to set the corners property, so the corner should be round, so we'll set it to 10 pixels. And then we want to ensure that the button is always the full width of the shopping cart container, so we'll set it to 100%. Thank you for watching this video. This was part 2 of the shopping cart creation. We designed the outlook of the cart however we are yet to build its functionality with JavaScript, which will be in part 3. Check out the playlist link in the description or pinned comment down below to continue. You can show your support by giving this video a thumbs up, comment down below if you found this video helpful, and subscribe to Code Harvest to get more videos like these. See you in the next video. Goodbye!